Welcome to the J's 72nd Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Suzanne Simon, and I am co-chair of Detroit Jewish Book Fair, and we are proud to be sponsored by the J, where you can find your Jewish center. Thanks. Book Fair would like to thank Platinum Day sponsors Elaine and Michael Serling for their support. Thanks to all of our generous donors, we are able to present most of our programs free of charge, and we invite you to become a patron or sponsor as well. We'd also like to thank Schuler Books, our community bookseller partner for 2023, and also, of course, extend our gratitude to the entire Book Fair committee. Your dedication and efforts have made all of this possible. We have a dynamic lineup of fantastic authors and programs that you will not want to miss. Please visit our website at jccdet.org/bookfair for more information. Please also visit our bookstore running throughout Book Fair at the J, and please shop our online bookstore where you will find more hand-selected books. bookshop.org/shop/Jewish Book Fair. Your purchases help to support this annual event and allow us to bring these wonderful authors to our community. We have an exciting and fascinating event for you today, and we want you to be part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comment section below or by texting the number in the corner of your screen. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they will take as many of your questions as they can. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way you'll never miss any of our exciting virtual events. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's guests. Jennifer Coburn is the author of Cradles of the Reich. She has also published a mother-daughter travel memoir, We'll Always Have Paris, as well as 6 contemporary women's novels. Additionally, Jennifer has contributed to 5 literary anthologies, including A Paris All Your Own, and she lives in San Francisco with her husband, William, and when Jennifer is not going down historical research rabbit holes, she volunteers with So Say We All, a live storytelling organization where volunteers with So Say You All, she helps children, and she is a performer, producer, and performance coach. She is also an active volunteer in Reality Changers, a nonprofit that supports low-income high school students in becoming the first in their families to attend college. Rabbi Benjamin Altshuler is new to the Metro Detroit Jewish community. He currently serves as Jewish Studies faculty for Frankel Jewish Academy, and previously he has led congregations in Wisconsin, Indiana, and West Virginia. He was ordained by HUC-JIR and is an alumnus of Avodah, the Jewish Service Corps.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And it's great to be back in Detroit, even if virtually. I went to school in Ann Arbor and just have so many great memories in Detroit and the surrounding areas. So thanks again for having me. So what is a nice Jewish girl doing writing a book about a Nazi breeding program? This was the question I was asked when I was writing Cradles of the Reich. I was asked this over and over and over again. And finally, I just said, Mom, come on. But seriously, I told her that it was very important for us to study this period because as my father would remind us, his family in the 1930s in Brooklyn, this was their greatest fear, was Hitler crossing the Atlantic Ocean and bringing his war to America. And his parents were so terrified of this that they made a plan. Next slide, please. They made a plan for their 3 children. In the center is my father, Shelley. He was 2 years old, and they all lived in a two-family house in Brooklyn where the German neighbors downstairs volunteered to adopt my father should Hitler come to the United States. On the left is my Aunt Bernice. Bernice was Gentile passing, so a Catholic church offered her one of 9 spots at a convent in upstate New York where they planned to hide Jewish girls if there were a need for that. Sadly, my Aunt Rita on the far right had polio, and she walked with a limp. So even if righteous Gentiles like the Kale family or the Catholic Church in our community wanted to help, there was nothing that they could do for Aunt Rita. So this fear, this trauma really haunted my father throughout his entire life, and in turn, mine. Thankfully, this never happened, but the looming threat really affected our family a great deal. Next slide, please. Here I am in 1979. It's our Passover Seder, and it is my turn to read the 4 questions, which I did. But that night, I remember so clearly having a 5th question, and that was, could the Holocaust happen again here? My father often wondered this aloud and imagined what would the world look like if Germany won the war? And the answer was always absolutely horrific, especially for Jewish families like ours. So when I saw an ad for a television show called The Man in the High Castle, which was based on the Philip K. Dick novel, which was a dystopian rewriting of history in America, 1962, after Germany has won the war. This was my worst nightmare. I had to watch. There were a lot of fictional elements in this television show. Like in every episode, a swastika flag replaced the stars and stripes. And in one episode, the Statue of Liberty was blown up and replaced with the statue of a Nazi. And then there was an episode where this beautiful blonde woman, next slide, says that she was born through the Lebensborn Society, which was a program where young, attractive Aryan women were paired with SS officers to have sex, and the children that were created belonged to the Reich and went to good German families. So I figured with all of the fictional elements in this show, that's got to be one too. But curiosity got the better of me, and I Googled Lebensborn Society. And this, next slide, is the first image that I saw. It was then that I realized that the Lebensborn Society was real. It was a top secret breeding program that lasted 10 years, from 1935 until the end of the war. Next slide, please. Hitler's second in command, Reich Heinrich Himmler, had a plan to create 2 million racially valuable babies for the Reich. So he created the Lebensborn program, which operated in 3 ways. One, as I mentioned, they coupled young Aryan women with SS officers for mating. It was also a maternity home for young women who were already pregnant, and they could live a life of comfort in a Lebensborn home, but then their children belonged to the Reich. Then when the war started in 1939, the Nazis began kidnapping children from countries that they invaded after their men on the ground had identified that they had the desirable racial features. Now, those children were brought back to Germany for a process called Germanization, and then they were placed for adoption with German families in good standing with the Nazi Party. In the end, 20,000 babies were bred through the Lebensborn Society, and 200,000 were kidnapped, half from Poland alone. Next slide, please. I was horrified when I heard about this. And I was also fascinated. A lot of questions about how these women were chosen, where the homes were. Why would a woman have sex with a stranger just to produce a child for the Reich? And that's what they called it, having a baby for the Führer, having a child for Hitler. So to answer these questions, I went to look for a historical novel that would tell me, tell me how the program worked, but also tell me the stories of the women who were involved. What I found was that there were a lot of nonfiction books, but no novels. So I set out to write the novel that I wanted to read with a book club. Next slide, please. Now, Cradles of the Reich is not my first book. Before Cradles of the Reich, I wrote We'll Always Have Paris, which is about my daughter and I bopping through Europe together on a 12-city tour. Before that, I wrote romantic comedies. So writing about Nazis was not the next natural step for my career. But I could not stop thinking about this program. Next slide, please. The program where at the same time and place in history where a mass genocide was being perpetrated, at the same time, Nazis were breeding new babies as part of the same evil plan to create a so-called master race. Throughout my life, I've never heard about Nazi Germany or the Shoah without people quickly reminding me that we are to never forget. And I absolutely agree. I have been deeply moved by the stories of survivors and victims of the Shoah. At the same time, I believe it's important for us to examine the evils of anti-Semitism so that we can we recognize the early signs of the rise of fascism. And I realize how incredibly timely that is now. I've been giving this talk for a year, and now I just got a lump in my throat. We don't have to look for clues for early signs, but we do have to use our voices to fight against anti-Semitism. And the reason that I chose to explore three faces of Gentile Germany, which is the resistor, the bystander, and the perpetrator, is I wanted to never excuse, never justify, but I wanted to get inside the head and say, what in God's name happened to this person? What happened to Germany that led them down this quick descent to madness and worship of an evil cult leader? So as I mentioned, the book features 3 point of view characters. One is Gundi. Now, she is a beautiful, blonde, tall, everything that the Nazis loved, university student. They didn't love that, but she was a university student. And when she becomes pregnant, she is really coerced into being in this program, which she wants no part of, because what the Nazis don't know about her is that she's a member of the resistance. And her baby is the child of her Jewish boyfriend, who she loves dearly. Then there's the bystander, Irma. She's a nurse who comes to the program, and she feels like she's doing a good thing for her country, for the women in the program, and she doesn't really see what the Nazis are truly about yet. But as she spends time in this program, she learns, and she needs to choose a side. The third point of view character, Hilda, really difficult to write, but really important for me to write from that perspective. Again, never to justify, but to try to understand, to get some opposition intelligence, if you will. So these are 3 fictional characters, next slide please, who live in the real Heim Hochland maternity home. Now, this was the first of the Lebensborn homes, but there were 26 others. Next one, please. Heim Hochland was in Bavaria, but there were also homes in Germany, Belgium, France, Norway, Austria, Luxembourg, Holland, and Sweden. Young women were eager to be part of this program. Is everything okay? Okay, great. So eager to be part of this program, but why? Why would they do this? So in order for me to understand why women would go along with this program, I had to zoom out and take a look at Nazi culture with a more broad lens, especially as it related to motherhood and population. So the birth rate after World War I in Germany was declining, as was the population rate. So the Nazi propaganda machine kicked into full gear in 1935, and they said, if you're a patriotic German family, you will have 4 or more children. These were called child-rich families. And then to incentivize this in 1939, and I'm going to give a trigger warning. The next slide that I'm going to show is a Nazi medal, and therefore it includes a swastika. If that's going to upset anyone, I'm just going to ask you to turn your head for just a minute. Okay, so here are the Mutterkreuz medals, which German women received if they had 3 healthy children. They received a bronze medal if they had 4 or more babies, silver if they had 6, and gold if they had 8. Let's switch to the next slide so we can just get this off the screen. Okay, so this is how the economy worked. The young women who were breeding in the homes, that was the supply side. The demand side were older, established German families who wanted to round up. So this German woman has 2 children. She probably has another one at home. And then she probably adopted this little baby so that she would be eligible for the Mutterkreuz, which is hanging around her neck. And women would wear these crosses every day with pride. It was a huge status symbol. If members of the Hitler Youth or the girls' branch of the Hitler Youth, the Bundesdeutsche Mädel, if they saw a woman with these cross medals, they had to salute her as if she were the Führer himself. And then, next slide. The Nazis began teaching young girls at a very early age that the most patriotic thing they could do, the best thing they could do for Germany, was to have babies early and many. 2 reasons for this. 1, the birth rate was in decline, as I mentioned, but also the Reich was expanding. The Nazis called this the Lebensborn. So the Nazis needed to populate these new territories with new families. Not every woman qualified for the Lebensborn. If I can have the next slide, please, that would be great. The acceptance rate was only 40%. And in order to qualify for the program, a woman, whether she was willing to become pregnant or whether she was already pregnant, she had to demonstrate racial value. So what does that mean? It means 3 generations of pure Aryan blood and 3 generations of no physical or mental disabilities whatsoever. Now, I'm going to go quickly over the next slides because I know we've all seen these images of the Nazi racial screening tools. So they screened for eye color, hair color, facial measurements, and skin color. In the back of my book, I have a very extensive author's note, which tells you what, next slide, please, what is fact and what is fiction. I've also put on Instagram a series of fact and fiction slides so that when you come to the part where, say, there's a Nazi naming ceremony, baby naming ceremony, and an officer pulls out his sword from its scabbard and lays the tip of his sword on the baby's stomach to name him a member in good standing in the Nazi party. I want you to know that that is not my overactive imagination. That is what really, really happened. Next slide, please. So the women who qualified for Lebensborn went to go live in beautiful estates that were decorated with furniture and artwork stolen from the Jewish people. A lot of people ask me, we can take the slides off right now. If you, Lauren, we can go to full screen talking. A lot of people ask me about the research that I did for Cradles of the Reich. So a lot of things that you would imagine. I took classes, I read books, I watched every propaganda film made, do not recommend, and consulted with experts. What I also did was get people who were experts in the mundane details of life in Germany in 1940, because I knew that, I knew it was going to be easy to find the dates that countries were invaded, the non-aggression pacts that were signed. These are all well documented. But smaller things like when a man puts on his pants in Germany 1939, does he button, snap, or zip them? And I was just actually texting with a German author this morning on a new book that I'm writing. And I said, hey, when a man proposes to a woman in Germany in 1940, does he give a diamond ring, or how does that work? So all these little details needed about 20 experts and people who lived in the period. So one of my experts who I adored was a food historian. Like, who knew that was a job? And this is my favorite story because it involves a rabbit hole, a literal rabbit hole, not just a historical rabbit hole research. So I have a scene where Hilda is coming home from school and she smells that her mother is cooking Hassenpfeffer, which is a braised hare stew. And I thought, you know what? This is a stew and they're eating it in April. And this is a hearty kind of meal. Would they eat stew in spring? So I called Ursula and she said, Charles, that's not the problem. We eat the stew all year round. Your problem is, where are they going to find the rabbit in April when everybody knows that the rabbit hunting season ends in December? So I said, okay, well, this is a high-ranking Nazi family. They don't have to follow the normal rules. They could have just shot the rabbit in April. And she said, yeah, that could happen too. But the rabbits in April are just coming out of hibernation. And their meat is stringy because they're so skinny. And that's not what you want for a Hassenpfeffer. So I said, Ursula, how about this? They shot the rabbit in December. They put it in the icebox. They thawed it in April, and then they cooked it for the stew. And she said, oh, Giles, that's plausible. So in chapter 2, when you read one line of internal dialogue where Hilda says, I wonder where Mama found a rabbit this time of year, much less one plump and juicy enough to cook in a stew. That, my friends, was 7.5 hours of research. And then, what the worst is? The worst is when you write a whole explanation of making the rabbit stew. Your editor says, I don't think we need the rabbit stew scene. So these were kind of some of the surprises that I found along the way in doing the research, was how many little cultural and linguistic details needed to be researched. At this time, I'd love to open the floor for questions and discussion about Lebensborn, book writing, whatever you'd like.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's really great to be here with you. So thanks for taking the time. It's also nice that you received that feedback from your mother, who I understand you are currently visiting. So that's even more appreciated. Yes, I'd love to talk to you a bit about your process. Maybe to start, you could tell us about Rolf Schultz, the neighbor that you met with.
I did. So Rolf Schultz, I wanted to speak with older Germans who would know about the Lebensborn Society. And I found survivors to talk to. I found people in the Jewish community to talk to. I found rabbis to consult with. What I didn't find was someone who was there, who was Gentile and was on the receiving end of the propaganda. So Rolf Schulz, who's now 92 years old, when he was 7 years old, he remembers vividly walking around Berlin the morning after the first night of the November pogroms that the Nazis called Kristallnacht, which is either, the anniversary of that is either today or tomorrow. I think it's tomorrow. So he remembers vividly walking around and seeing the broken glass. He was told by his culture, by his community, that he needed to join the Hitler Youth to protect the Germans from the Jews. Now, he was 7 years old. He was part of a group called the Deutsche Jungen, which is the Deutsche Jungvolk. And they did not perpetrate any violence. They went to, they were in a system that was part of it, but they went to summer camp and they did war games. Now, I want to say at 92 years old, Rolf cannot speak about this time without crying. And I've said to him, should we talk? Should we take a break? And he says, no, this is part of my penance, is that I have to tell the truth about what happened. And he was great because I went to a group called the German American Society, and they were mostly lovely, but also a little defensive, a little defensive. Rolf told me the truth. Rolf said, I loved Hitler, and here's why. And I need to know why. Why? How do they get you? So that we can protect ourselves from them getting others. So that's Rolf. He's 92. He's still going strong. And he's very happy to consult with me on this project.
Indeed. Your work joins, I think, a growing genre of exploring these narratives from the Second World War, from Europe. We see a lot of narratives, especially, as a Jewish audience, we see a lot of stories of survivors and victims of the Holocaust, and certainly many also from the perspective of Nazi soldiers. Why is it important to see narratives from the bystanders, from that perhaps third rail of people who were there, like Rolf, who witnessed it, even if they were not themselves the aggressors?
Right. I think it's important for readers to recognize ourselves in the choices that characters need to make. Everybody that I talk to swears they would have been part of the resistance and they would have been out in the forest. It's an easy choice, but I want us to see characters experiencing their own fear, their own confusion, so that we can say, like, all right, well, in the privacy of my own thoughts, I would be scared. I can make some admissions to myself too, or I can face some situations I've never thought about. Like what's it like to grow up in this bubble? I have one character that I kept on asking myself, is there any chance for her to be a decent person? Is there any off-ramp for her? And I couldn't find a single off-ramp. I couldn't find a single way for her to get out of this system without somebody outright taking her and saying and deprogramming her. But both her parents were Nazis. She went to a school in a Nazi system. Yeah, so I want to understand that, so we just keep knowing that this is not about those. I just want to present a reminder that it's not about those bad people over there in that time that this could happen. Nazi Germany was not a unique landscape. It's been recreated. It's been. It is a unique landscape. There's nothing like that has ever happened, but the genocide and oppression of people is and dictatorship is not new. And I want us to see the playbook.
And so you chose to tell these stories through the voices of three women. I'm interested first how you felt embodying the voice of Gundi, Hilda, and Irma. And was any of them or more difficult to embody? Was any of them easier to see through their eyes?
Well, I liked Gundi and I liked Irma. I knew Irma was so Gundi was the 20-year-old college university student, and
Yeah.
she was a very lovely young woman. She never had the experience of anybody ever giving her negative feedback in the world. But then she meets Leo Solomon, her Jewish classmate, who's not, I mean, she's beautiful, but that's not the first thing that he notices about her. And that's not what he loves about her. And then I loved writing her discovery of the beauty of the Jewish culture and faith. She never met any Jewish people. She, didn't really know any Jews. But then she meets this guy. Finally, he accepts her. He brings her home to his family. And writing the scenes of his family was so much fun because I would just say, all right, that one's Aunt Rita, that one's Aunt Bernice, that one's Uncle Aby, and then I would just, Grandpa Aby, and then I would just say, what would they do if they brought this Shiksa goddess home one day in the middle of the rise of the Nazi regime? Like, how would they act? What would they do? And what would the conversation be like? So that one was pleasurable to write because Gundi was a good person at heart and she became better. Irma, the bystander, I think most people in Germany, most Gentiles in Germany were bystanders. And they turned their head to save themselves. And I didn't mind writing Irma because I knew she was going to have a positive character arc, and I knew she was going to come around, and I knew she was going to rise to heroism that she didn't know she was capable of. Writing Hilda was hard. It was really hard because I had to imagine she's not the villain in her own story. She's doing something. She's misguided. She's pathetic. She is at times evil. But how did she get there? What's going on? What's her original pain? And how do we recognize that in others? So a lot of people ask me, like, was it really depressing to write this? And it was depressing to see man's inhumanity toward man. But what was more, the overriding feeling was one of enormous privilege and joy that I got to talk about these lesser known programs in World War II and Nazi Germany. It was really an honor to be able to tell this story.
Did any of did your experience in other genre, romance and travelogue, inform the way you approached writing this book?
I don't think it did. I don't think it did. Maybe just knowing that I had the wherewithal to sit down and write an entire book. But this was harder than any book that I've ever written before, because not only do you have to keep the story moving, you have to get all of these historical facts right. I went through the book when I got it. I got a review copy from my publisher, and I said, I'm just going to read this and see if there's any page in this book that didn't require substantive research. Six pages out of 320.
Wow. Remarkable. And so, taking on that research, I wonder if you can talk about the historical record. That is the fact that a lot of the records of the society were destroyed, and yet we're also left with a number of things. For example, at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, how did the historical record and some of the ephemera you encountered inform that research?
Well, one of the first places that I visited was the Museum of the Holocaust Museum in New York, and it was there that I saw the racial screening tools. And it's also there that I saw a Mutter cross. I actually bought a Mutter cross because I wanted to hold it in my hand and really just, it was very heartening to see that the metals seller that I got this from made me write an extensive essay about why I wanted this piece of, thrilled that he made me jump through those hoops. So how did that inform the work? Not as much as it will on the book that I'm working on now. And when I'm working on a book now set in the Theresienstadt ghetto in northern Czechoslovakia, it was Hitler's model camp used for propaganda. And there I went to the camp to stay for 5 days. And there, as I was immersed in the things of this camp, I know what the wood smells like in the bunks. I know what kind of bugs are flying around. So that, I would say, that book, I had a more immersive experience in terms of my interaction with the relics of the Shoah.
So it sounds like you're hooked, writing more historical fiction of this time period.
I really am. I want to write. I want to read, and if I can't read it, I'm going to write it, a book about the Warsaw Uprising. Every time I kept finding information about the Warsaw Uprising. I was like, I want to read a book about that. I have one on my nightstand for when I hand in my next manuscript, but that's a time that really inspired. 4 weeks, this ragtag army fought off the Nazis. 4 weeks. I love stories of rebellion. I love them. When my husband and I went to Prague in the spring, we took a tour of Operation Anthropoid on the anniversary of Operation Anthropoid, which was the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. And we were there in the church where the resistance fighters fought till the end, and it was just so incredibly inspiring. So I do, yeah. So that's a long answer to your question. How do you engage with the things of the Holocaust, and that's one of the ways.
Indeed. So a central concept you're exploring here is genetics and the idea of a superior race. But perhaps ironically, we have a parallel narrative of epigenetics and how that might be transferred through generational trauma. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing some of that explored today. So I wonder if you can talk a bit about how our DNA can tell a story, both fictional and quite real, in defining our historical identity and some of our collective communal memory as well.
That is such a great question, and one that I don't know that I'm entirely qualified to answer. I'm wishing my daughter was here. She's a PhD student in neuroscience.
Oh,
do I sound like a Jewish mother? She's a PhD, but I don't know I know for me that this tension about, like, can this happen again? Who would hide me? I know for me, that's absolutely an epigenetic factor. I don't know how that experience affects the broader culture. I imagine it does, but I don't have any data to make an intelligent observation about that. What do you think?
I think that part of what continues to inform our fear of anti-Semitism today is rooted in the narratives that are passed to us, as well as something internal. And whether that's epigenetic or whether that's just something that we've grown to take on through our communal identity, perhaps remains to be seen. but it also might help us understand why a book like this can gain a footing in an audience today. Is it that our modern and current tensions are echoes of the past?
Mm.
Was that something you were looking for in designing your book for your audience?
I was looking for, so I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction. I did want this book to serve as a warning, especially to young people, that you don't know what propaganda is when you're swimming in it. So, so I'm not sure that answered the question entirely, but my main purpose in writing this was to tell the story about a program that we didn't know about, and to serve as a warning that this can happen again in a different form.
A cautionary tale.
Indeed.
So you started from a fifth question at the Passover Seder. I wonder if you're familiar with what some call the 614th commandment, not to give Hitler a posthumous victory. And that's seen in our pursuit of Jewish culture and the next generation today. Is that something that you think about?
Well, I think about it quite a bit right now. I am absolutely terrified and horrified, mostly horrified, and then also terrified of the rise in anti-Semitism today. And yeah, I saw what really frightened me when I was doing this research for this book and for the book that I'm working on now is how long it took people to not say it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. I have a character in this current book that I'm writing who's saying it's going to be fine while in a ghetto, while while serving as a slave laborer, while living in squalor, keeps on saying it's going to be fine. And that wasn't unusual. I didn't want to make up a character who wasn't realistic. I read the diary of he wasn't a survivor he was a survivor of Terezin, and then he was deported and murdered at Auschwitz. So I guess he's not. Anyway, Philip Maines was a prisoner at Theresienstadt from the beginning to the end. I'm so sorry about that. This was one of the things that when I'm at my mother's house can happen. I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Calls from Amsterdam. I'm sorry about that. I knew there'd be some sort of technological glitch, but I apologize. So we were talking about the rise of anti-Semitism, and if you could help me get back on track, that just distracted me a bit.
Of course. We're talking about, how this book and its general themes might connect with an audience today, given the rise of anti-Semitism, and given perhaps how we could react.
Yes, thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That threw me off. So as I was reading the diary of one of the prisoners at Theresienstadt, who was then deported to Auschwitz and murdered, until the last page of his diary, he was saying, it's all going to be okay. Everything is going to be all right. And he kept focusing on, I had wonderful attendance at my lecture at Theresienstadt. And the diary ended mid-sentence because he was deported. And I asked my daughter about this, the neuroscientist. I said, what is it about the human brain, that people are able to say, like, no, that's not possible. This couldn't be, because there were people really up until the bitter end that said, this is not happening. There are no gas chambers. And I'm talking about the prisoners who said that this couldn't possibly be happening. And it is because there is such a cognitive dissonance. There is when your morality would not allow you to murder others, you can't imagine this plot, the concentration camps of the genocide. So I wanted one of my characters to be as optimistic and see how that rubbed against his granddaughter, who was very much grounded in reality. When she had an opportunity to leave and her grandfather wouldn't let her, she was very, very, very angry with him, because she had a more clear-eyed vision of what could happen as a younger person.
I wonder if that principle of hope is something that is shared among survivors.
I read a really interesting quote by a survivor, Tova Friedman, and she is on the Jewish Book Council Network as well. And I read her diary, the Child of Auschwitz, and a line that stuck with me so well was, she said, hope was their accomplice, their meaning the Nazis. And when the Nazis said, oh, hang your uniform here for after you get out of the shower, it was a way for them to pacify us. And many of the people were like, okay, all right, they wouldn't be asking me to hang my uniform outside unless there was an exit to this. So I saw Tova at a book festival, and I said, Tova, that was such a beautiful line. Hope is their accomplice. Can I use that in my new book? And she said, Mama, of course you can use it as and I'm so grateful, because I wanted to play with themes of hope and how it can be used to lift us up, and how it can also be used against us sometimes.
There is a very powerful play currently showing in Detroit at the Detroit Public Theater called 8 Nights, which is a survivor narrative. And when the character is asked whether she maintained hope throughout the ordeal, she replies no, that it was just luck that got her through. I wonder about that sense of survivor's guilt, both among the victims and the bystanders, who had to come to terms with what they maybe were denying or just trying to avoid thinking about happening in their world.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would love to learn more about that, but I haven't, when I've talked to survivors, I haven't really come across guilt. I've heard a lot of people say that because they survived, it gave them a sense of purpose to tell the world that this really happened, because they knew that there would be Holocaust deniers. And by the way, I want to be super, super clear that when I say there were people in the camps who denied it, I mean, it's not that they were Holocaust deniers in the way we speak of today. It's just they could not fathom something this evil happening. And they just kept hoping that it was a rumor.
What sort of obligation do you think our generation and the following have to tell stories like this, because those who were those primary witnesses may not be around to share their experiences much longer?
What do you think our obligation is to
tell stories of the Holocaust, to
I think it's our
narrative alive?
It's a huge obligation, and I'm pleased to see so many survivors have published memoirs. I I wouldn't say it's their obligation to do, but it's our obligation to read all of the narratives that someone took the time to share with us. And I think it's up to us to, take our children, to take children that we work with, that we know, non-Jews, to Holocaust museums and say, this happened. Here's evidence of this happening, and it can happen again. It can happen to us. It can happen to you. And these are the mechanics of, this is how it has happened. So let's look out for each other and make sure it doesn't happen again.
It's very interesting. Now, I know you say you're working on this book on Terezin. I also heard a rumor you might be offering a sequel to Cradles of the Reich, perhaps from Hilda's perspective further?
Well, it's not a sequel per se, but you're right. The book set in Terezin is about Hilda.
Oh, it is.
Yeah. But it's not about Hilda as much as it is. It's two-person perspective. Hilda has gone on to live to reach her dream of being a Nazi propaganda filmmaker. When she goes to Terezin to make the documentary on Theresienstadt, she comes across her long-lost friend who she barely mentions in Cradles of the Reich, Hannah Kaufman. And Hannah Kaufman was a German Jewish girl who Hilda was best friends with until 1935, when Hannah Kaufman's family decided, you know what, we're going to leave Munich and we're going to go move to Prague. And Hilda was left very hurt, wondering what happened to her friend. Her friend never said goodbye. And then she meets her at Theresienstadt and says, will you be a production assistant for me on this film? So now the two of them need each other to survive, because Hannah is part of a resistance group, and the resistance group has been trying different things to some degree of success and failure. There was a baby smuggling operation. There was this mica splitting operation, and they need a win for the resistance. And the way that they plan this is to undermine the propaganda film that Hilda is there to make. So it's a surprise ending. The people that you think are going to, you know what, I won't end it. I won't spoil it, but it's everybody getting what they deserve.
Wow, that's wonderful. So it's, I suppose you're continuing some of these themes and narratives, and yet there's perhaps a few strings of Cradles of the Reich that the reader is left to ponder. I'm thinking in particular about Leo's fate.
Yes, yeah, that is something I get a lot at book clubs, as they go, what happened to Leo? What happened? You didn't wrap that storyline up, and I did that on purpose because, you know, when I was talking to survivors of the Shoah, a lot of times I would say, so what happened to your grandfather? So my friend Jeff Schindler, his grandfather died at the small fortress in Terezin. And I said, oh, was he taken on a march, or was he lined up and executed in the field, or like how did that happen there as the war was winding down? He said, we don't know. We have no idea. We have no idea. We know he didn't survive, and that's all we know. And I talked to so many people who said, I came home to my city, my village, and there were so many people missing, and we never fully got the answers to the questions that we had. So for better or for worse, I wanted to leave the reader with that sense of agitation and incompletion and not knowing what happened to a character. Now, that might have been the wrong choice, because I certainly get a lot of people saying to me, so is he okay? And if anybody wants to know what happened to Leo, I know, email me and I'll tell you. But I left it open-ended because so many questions were unanswered. I just wanted to mirror that experience a little bit for the reader, or create that experience for the reader.
Yes, perhaps that sense of mystery and wondering is the reality, and that's perhaps something that as readers we have to deal with. I had one observation, and I'm curious if what you think of this. So Lebensborn, German for spring of life,
Mm-hmm.
the Hebrew would be Tel Aviv.
Mm.
Stretch, but I'm curious about, how some of our modern narratives, and certainly as we're thinking currently about Israel, help us navigate the legacy of the Lebensborn program, and think a lot further about how we continue to tell such stories.
So, it's interesting. You have me stumped here. So the question is, give me the question again, please.
Well, just in simpler terms, I see a peripheral linguistic connection to Israel today. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of people, Israel represents a reaction or outcome related to the events of the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. Today, we're thinking a lot about Israel for other reasons. Mm-hmm. And so as we contend with the legacy of things like the Lebensborn program and whether or not such stories, are being told, mm-hmm. I'm thinking a lot about, how we represent those things and what is actively in our minds as we consider our generational inheritance from the past.
Well, so as far as the translation, I actually did not know that, and that's really quite beautiful that Tel Aviv is a spring of life. And how do we tell the stories? I mean, I guess the simple answer is when we examine the narratives of the rise of anti-Semitism, it's with a very critical eye, but also a curious eye about how we can not be bystanders, how we can speak up sooner and make a difference before something like this can happen.
Indeed, is the goal. So in the process of writing, I believe you were in touch with some of the Lebensborn participants or the children that came out of it. Do you know what happened to the Lebensborn women after the end of the program, and what became of any of the children who were born?
So there were 200,000 children stolen from the program, 20,000 bred. Only 20% of them ever found out that they were products of the program. Oh. The others had no idea. So what happened to the women is it was a shame to be associated with this program. So a lot of them never spoke of it. One woman, Hildegard Trutz, who died in an old age, thinking that this was the best thing that she's ever done and that she was proud of her involvement. I'm sorry, I'm sitting on the phone right now. But most of the women were shunned. There was one woman, the lead singer in ABBA, Annie Fried-Lyngstad, the one with brown hair. She was a product of the Lebensborn program, and she and her mother were so ostracized in their community that they had to move to Sweden.
Oh my!
Yeah. So I got to meet a man who is now 75. He was one of the last children born from this program. He was conceived at the very end of the war, and he was born after the war. And he called me when he saw an article in the newspaper about my book. And he said, I am a Lebensborn baby. So I have a friend who is a Holocaust historian, and she's actually looking to make a museum in San Diego. But I said to her, Sandra, come to this event where John Gunderson is going to be, And he's going to bring his birth certificate and his documentation that he was involved with the Lebensborn Society. And he did. And Sandra said, this guy is the real deal. He's really a Lebensborn baby. And he was abandoned at a home when he was 2 years old. And then he was adopted by a Norwegian family. And then they all moved to the United States when he was 2 years old, when the baby was 2 years old.
Wow, what a remarkable story! It's amazing that he even had a record of his birth certificate to retain that historical evidence.
2 birth certificates. And if any of your listeners are interested, John Gundersen, S-E-N, was featured in the San Diego Union Tribune. They did a story on the 2 of us, as did the Washington Post. Catherine Parker interviewed him the day that this book came out. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Yes, to all the listeners, I believe there's a number of connections to the news that are available on your website, jennifercoburnbooks.com.
Actually, it's Jennifer Coburn.
So check that out. Well, good resources for everyone involved.
Great. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer and Rabbi Altshuler, for being with us this morning. And thanks to all of you online for joining us. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit our website, jccdet.org/bookfair, for our full schedule and ways to get involved. If you haven't read this book, go get it. It's powerful. See you next time.